What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and, well, tomorrow is Mother's Day, and which is really saying a lot considering, in terms of my own family, we're pulling double duty with the holidays, especially since my parents' wedding anniversary is today, followed by Mother's Day tomorrow. So, yeah. Kind of one of the few that has two things dealt with in a single day. But that being said, makes me wonder what about all the mothers in video games. And considering how I have played a lot of video games, there are a lot of characters I could think of that are mothers, which really does say a lot. So, basically just makes you wonder what I think are the best mothers in video games. So, that's entirely what this video is all about. And considering how many videos have focused on this sort of thing, yeah, this really does say a lot. So, it's time to count down the top 10 best mothers in video games. In my opinion, which really says a lot. I mean, if anyone thinks that any of these mothers shouldn't be considered, and there are mothers out there in video games out there that I neglected to mention, that's fine. That's your opinion. These are more or less my opinion. And opinions make the world go round. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, starting off first at number 10, we have Amanda DeSanta from Grand Theft Auto 5. And, oh boy, when it comes down to the Grand Theft Auto franchise, we don't have that, there aren't that many mothers we can pull from. As more often than not, they are either non-existent in some way, shape, or form. Case in point being CJ and Sweet's mother from San Andreas, who is, well, dead by the time the game starts up. And Nico's mother, who, well, is basically not even seen in the game, but is mentioned in different letters or emails and such. However, GTA 5 is more or less the one that we know that we get a few mothers, and mothers or mother figures. As again, each of the three protagonists do kind of fit into that, have something to fit into that. And yeah, even that doesn't do too much, as Franklin's Aunt Denise is kind of a maternal figure, she's not the best one. And Trevor's mom is just flat out borderline, I guess I'd say abusive of her son, or toxic to her son when you think about it, since she only shows up to more or less mooch off of her son's success. Seriously, I've only done that mission once. However, when it comes to Amanda DeSanta, Michael's wife, yeah, she's kind of the lesser of three evils in this game. Especially since when you're first introduced to her, you see her having a bit of a romantic rendezvous, so to speak, with her tennis coach, Kyle Chavis, which naturally would color your opinion of her, especially considering everything that happens in later on in the game. But more often than not, Michael's not the best, paternal figure in GTA 5. I mean, in fact, considering how their son Jimmy and their daughter Tracy turn out. But of course, Michael does act as a bit of a paternal figure to Franklin, of all people. And that being said, that kind of redeems him. But even with that, Amanda, on the other hand, is kind of interesting as well. As while she is kind of just drawn to the arms of several different men, she more or less still cares about Michael, as she more or less wants him to more or less stand up for himself and fight for her. Which does not seem as good as most people would think. But honestly, when you think about it, the fact that she does have a sort of softer or caring side for her husband, to the point that she's willing to even head to family therapy for the sake of their family, really does say a lot. And granted, I know this might defeat the purpose, but again, the lesser of three evils. Just really does say a lot. Boy, this is not starting off well. Moving on next at number 9, we have Hinawa from Mother 3. Alright. Yeah. When it comes to... we move on from Rockstar to Nintendo. And in all fairness, when it comes down to the Mother franchise, a lot of people know about Ness and Lucas as being the main ones. And as being the main notable characters from the franchise. Largely because of them being playable in Smash Brothers. In fact, like everyone else, I was introduced to Ness and the Mother franchise from playing the original Super Smash Brothers on the N64. So, yeah, I was kind of interested in it from the start. However, that being said, Nintendo, when it comes down to it, takes Nintendo some time to release these games to the West. And that's really saying a lot in the case of Mother 3, since the only ones that Nintendo's released to the West are Earthbound and Earthbound Beginnings, which is the very first game in the Mother franchise. And even to the point that even Mother 3, the fact that the only way to play Mother 3 is through emulation. And which is infuriating to say the least, since many of us want to play it. And considering, heck, even I have, and I've played through a bit of Mother 3. But that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the main mother of this game, Hinawa, who is the mother of Lucas. And yeah, for most of it, she's more or less kind of your typical mother, and the first time we see her, she's more or less seen making Lucas's and his brother Klaus's favorite meal, which is whatever. Which is, well, actually, whatever one you choose, whatever food you choose. However, that being said, even at the beginning of the game, things go a little, well, south. As basically, it's revealed that there was a Drago attack, and, well, Hinawa ended up getting killed in the process. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of a sad, tragic moment that, honestly, you see it from all sorts of angles, especially in the case of Lucas and how it affects both Lucas and Klaus. I mean, to the point that even Klaus heads off on his own to try and get revenge on the Drago that killed his mother, only to, well, end up falling from a cliff and eventually getting adopted into the Pig Mask army and becoming the Masked Man. Yeah, spoiler alerts for... And granted, this is spoiling it for me since I have not played through most of Mother 3. Mainly because I couldn't get past the gameplay of the game. The gameplay. Seriously, that Mecha Drago battle really tests me way too much. But even with that, you do see... There is a point of Mother 3 where you're basically, well... You're basically in what is implied to be heaven. And Lucas is implied to be what seemed to be heaven. Or at least a dream. And he ends up seeing Hinawa, who gives him... I guess I can't describe it, but she gives him the confidence to go on and keep fighting in his journey to save the world. And even further, in the fight, she even plays a final battle in the role in the battle again, a role in the final battle of the Masked Man, as before you face off against him for the final time. When you discover that the Masked Man is Lucas's brother Klaus, yeah, things tend to take a even more heartbreaking role, as it's moments from when not only Hinawa was alive, but when Lucas and Klaus were born, that basically allows Klaus to more or less come to his senses and, well, commit the ultimate sacrifice, which honestly is just even more heartbreaking. So, yeah. Really does say a lot. Hi. Moving on next at number 8, we have Mother Mai from The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to the Zelda... Yeah. Speaking of Nintendo and mothers... Yeah, when you think of the Zelda franchise, there aren't that many mothers in the franchise. And for a while, I was considering mentioning grandmothers, as honestly, there are a fair amount of interesting ones to be considered, like Link's grandma from The Wind Waker, and even Impa from Wind Waker, and even Impa from Breath of the Wild, as they are both notable for their grandmotherly demeanors. However, that being said, I decided to just go for mothers, and as such, this led me to the likes of Mother Maya Mai, which, considering how even when out of all the Zelda games I've played, one of the few games I played through was Link Between Worlds, which really does say a lot. And even with that, when you first meet Mother Maya Mai, it turns out her babies have gone missing. So leads to a nice little side quest to essentially rescue her babies. And it's a perfect way to utilize all the tactics that you acquired throughout the journey. And every 10 or so Maya Mai babies that you rescue, she has a chance to essentially upgrade any one of your weapons, which is a perfect way of making it stronger, especially considering the fact that you have to, of course, you do have to buy your weapons from Ravio, which, for those that don't know, I do not like Ravio. But when it comes down to it, the fact that Mother Maya Mai gives you stronger weapons, and stronger and better weapons, it's kind of a nice little incentive to deal with that purple bunny hooded coward. And even with that, after rescuing all the Maya Mais, she more or less ends up absorbing inhaling you and increasing your spin attack, which again really does say a lot. Though I wish they didn't have to imply vor in this case. Yeah. I don't know how to mention this all that much. But that being said, even with that, we need more mothers in the game. And yeah, I know there are a few mothers I could have essentially mentioned, but Mother Maya Mai is kind of the best that I could think of. Yeah. Moving on next at number 7, we have Ambessa Medarda from League of Legends. Oh boy! Yeah. How to mention League. Granted, while I haven't played League of Legends like at all, more often than not, in most of my lists, there are a point where I will have to mention where I noticed the League character tends to fit that certain description. I mean, heck, that was the case with Pirates and Ninja. That was the case with my Pirates and Ninjas videos, as basically a League character ended up coming up when I was planning those. And even with that, in terms of mothers, it really does say there really wasn't that many. However, while I haven't played League, I have seen Arcane. And honestly, this is the fact that it basically got me more interested in wanting to play League by how they showed all the characters. And especially some new ones, including introducing Ambessa Medarda. In fact, it was Arcane that inspired Riot to add her into the game. And naturally, the fact that she is a fearsome Noxian general really does say a lot, as she's able to hold her own against many of the other Noxian, many of the other feared Noxian warriors. Whether it's a character like like Sevica, if we go with season 2, or someone like Warwick or Singed, and heck, even someone like Swain. And keep in mind, I have not seen season 2 of Arcane. I mean, I do not want to be spoiled because I want to see season 2 of Arcane. Let's just be real. But even with that, she's more or less one of the few champions who definitely deserves her title. I mean, from increasing her movement speed with a flash step to more or less just bringing the hammer down with her blade. And granted, to be honest, she does basically show a bit of a interesting attraction to more, good-looking guys. Again, the fact that she basically decided to talk shop with Jace in a bathhouse, of all places, it really is kind of shocking, but kind of fitting for her. And heck, if it wasn't for Mbessa being as strong-willed and politically motivated, then it wouldn't have made her daughter Mel, a much more human and an impressive character by default. Which, again, really does say a lot. And keep in mind, League has a lot of amazing characters in the game. So, with, again, characters like Lux, Jinx, and Vi coming to mind. And the fact that Mbessa made Mel who she is really does say a lot. And yeah, the fact that she's basically kind of considered a mama bear in this case really does put that into perspective, especially with 2 more later on. So yeah, stay tuned. Moving on, next at number 6, we have Louise from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Alright. Honestly, when it comes down to it, if it has something to do with... Fire Emblem was the hardest one I could think of when I had the whole mother aspect. Granted, keep in mind, it's going to get even harder when fathers enter the picture. But when it comes to mothers, it really does... There's really a lot of... there is not that many that do tend to come to mind. Especially when you realize a good amount of mothers that can come to mind either are player-controlled units or are dead. And yeah, this really does say a lot when you consider that 2 Fire Emblem characters that could be considered mothers definitely came to mind. those being Queen Makoto from Fire Emblem Fates and Queen Lumera from Fire Emblem Engage, which, honestly, considering how both of them end up biting it, and both of them end up dying quite early in the game, but eventually end up coming back as, well, bosses in their own right. He really does say back in their, like, as bosses in their own right is kind of interesting, or painful if you take a look at Engage's entire thing with Lumera. But, yeah, there's really not that much. I mean, the only other one that tends to... I mean, heck, even in the earlier games, you do have characters like Queen Eleonora from Blazing Sword, aka Ellawood's mother, or even Joshua's mother, Queen Ismare from Sacred Stones. But even with that, there's not that much in that you learn about them in the game. However, that's not unlike Louise, who is basically one of your playable units in Blazing Sword. And honestly, she's one of your better snipers. I mean, granted, to be honest, I love archers, so yeah, this was gonna be a no-brainer for me. But in all fairness, I kinda prefer Rebecca to Louise. However, Louise definitely fits the idea of an outstanding mother. And the fact that she was born into royalty as, again, one of her relatives is the mother of Zephiel, of Prince Zephiel. Yeah, the same Zephiel who becomes what is essentially the big bad of the prequel game, Fire Emblem Binding Blade. Yeah. And even with that, she more or less is a kind individual who always is willing to do what's right who's always caring about people. I mean, heck, the first time you meet her, she's more or less worried about Athos. And she's more or less worried about Athos. And it's to the point that she's basically trying to get him to eat. Which really says a lot. And even with that, and that kind, caring personality definitely carries over to many of her supports. As while she does hold a regal air, it's also it adds to a nice little bit of personality to her that allows her to want to be seen as equals from everyone else. Yeah, kind of perfectly personable, to say the least. To the point that Rebecca looks up to her as a nice little role. That Rebecca looks up to her as a role model. She basically ends up doting on Hawkeye's daughter Ygritte like she was her own daughter, even though she is Hawkeye's daughter. And yeah, keep in mind, I also considered Ygritte, even considering. And she's even taking care of Eric as a surrogate son, even to the point of basically offering a chance to live with her and Pent at Castle Regle, to the point of even redecorating his room to look more like a library, since she knows about his love of studying. And heck, even someone like Sane also, even someone like Sane, who is a complete and utter Casanova, as in, he tends to hit on anyone in a skirt. Yeah, even he basically nips that in the bud when he realizes that she's basically married to Penn. So he honestly realizes that so not only does he treat her with respect, but he realizes that his flirting with her is just crossing the line. And speaking of Pent, yeah, she hasn't. Considering how most Fire Emblem pairings are just kind of either implied by fans or are somewhat non-canon in certain aspects. Pent and Louise's relationship is one of the most heartwarming relationships, which really does say a lot since the two of them basically more or less stick together. I mean, even with the A support, Pent basically he reaffirms his position to protect Louise no matter what. But this leads to the most impressive thing. She's been fighting for 2. Yeah. In Blazing Sword, she is pregnant with her eldest son, Klein. When I first saw that, I was just flabbergasted. But at the same time, the fact that she's been fighting while pregnant with Klein, it really impressed me so much that honestly, I could see why Klein eventually became as skilled as he was. Because his mother basically kept up with her bow skills while pregnant with him. Granted, I don't know how that works, but it's kind of funny to say the least. Moving on next to number 5, we have Abigail Marston from Red Dead Redemption. Oh boy, back to Rockstar. And naturally, when it comes down to the Red Dead Redemption franchise, the only game I've played through thus far has been the first Red Dead Redemption. So basically, I have heard of John Marston basically talking about his wife, Abigail. And while it's been a while since Red Dead Redemption 2 has been out like around 9 or 10 years. Yeah, it's been that long. I'm realizing how old I am. Even with that, considering how I've been watching both the Rad Brads and Markiplier's Let's Plays of Red Dead Redemption 2, honestly, I've realized that it's honestly given me an idea of how strong Abigail has been throughout both games, as in both Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Redemption 1. And this is saying a lot since Abigail was a part of the Vanderlyn gang with John Marston, and even Red Dead Redemption 2's protagonist, Arthur Morgan, to the point that she's kind of an interesting fixture within it. And while we don't see that much of her in the game, we see the fact that she more or less trusts Arthur Morgan as basically a member of her family, to the point that she basically asks him to take her son and Jack fishing. And keep in mind, Jack is a young kid in that game. So it really does say a lot that she sees Arthur as an honorary uncle. But even with that, she sees him as an honorary uncle to Jack. But even with that, she more or less wants to have somewhat of a better life for her and her son. And especially considering what happened to John at the beginning of Red Dead Redemption 2, after he more or less gets injured in a mountain lion attack. But even with that, and after Arthur dies from tuberculosis and John takes over, yeah, it's kind of a nice little slice of life, as basically John's willing to make a better life for her and Jack. Which goes even further in Red Dead Redemption 1, after the Pinkertons end up holding her and Jack captive. And basically tasked John with hunting down the remainder of the Vanderlyn gang, including Dutch, in order to get them back. And even with that, Abigail still believes that he's in that better life. However, she knows that things are good. Things are basically going to be not too kind to them, especially since they were a part of the Vanderlyn gang. But she still holds a sort of strong demeanor to her, which really says a lot. Which, in contrast with the likes of Bonnie McFarlane at the beginning of Red Dead Redemption, which I understand honestly stands as a sort of solid respect when they eventually meet, and it really shows. I mean, heck, considering the fact that John eventually does get killed by the Pinkertons, and Abigail dies soon afterwards, that strength is perfectly instilled in their son Jack, who at the end of the game ends up getting tasked with hunting down Edgar Ross, the man who killed his father. Yeah. Honestly, it really does say a lot. Yeah, there's nothing, but it says a lot. Moving on next at number 3, we have Tara Branford from Final Fantasy VI. Alright. Honestly, Final Fantasy... Dang it, what the... Honestly, when it comes to Final Fantasy, one thing comes to mind. There really, considering how many Final Fantasy games I've played, there really aren't that many mothers I can think of. And honestly, like Fire Emblem and Zelda, like Fire Emblem, Zelda, or GTA, they kind of run the gamut when you think about it. As in, they're either dead, like Rydia's mother in Final Fantasy IV, or Elmira in Final Fantasy VII. Maybe not Elmira, but Aerith's mother in Final Fantasy VII. Or they are basically just, well, terrible like Arabella in Final Fantasy XVI. Yeah, I haven't played 16, and even I know how much of a, well, terrible human being Arabella is. But that being said, this just kind of led me to the whole mother figures in games. And honestly, even though I haven't played through the entirety of Final Fantasy VI, I honestly could not stay away from the idea of Terra being seen as a mother. And yeah, this is someone who basically came into her own history, eventually discovered her own identity as an Esper at the beginning of the game. And this really says a lot, considering how Final Fantasy VI is the only game where the main villain, Kefka Palazzo, wins. So basically, you would think that would end there, but no. Because the second half starts off with you playing as Celes and trying to get back and trying to reform your party after, in the entire aftermath of Kefka basically destroying a good amount of the world. That being, and one of the areas you come to is a town full of children is a little village full of children, and Terra basically acting as a mother figure to all of them, even being called Mama by many of them. And honestly, this is because after the entire cataclysm had happened, she discovered many of the children had lost their parents. So she basically decided to stay behind in the village and take care of them, which definitely says a lot. However, you decide to help them out, and in facing off against an enemy monster. Again, I am currently watching through a Let's Play of Final Fantasy VI, so take some time for me to figure it out. But she does decide to join in the battle by basically taking in her Esper form in order to defend them from that monster. Only for the kids to be more or less afraid of her, the orphans to be afraid of her in her Esper form. That is until one of them more or less recognizes her as their mama. And honestly, if there is ever a moment where I felt like I wanted to tear up, it's that moment. And keep in mind, I was watching this as a part of a Let's Play, so yeah. Granted, this was someone else playing through it, but honestly, I felt myself tearing up when I saw this. So, really says a lot. And it's even further once you realize everything that goes on. Granted, this makes me realize I need to play through Final Fantasy VI and many other Final Fantasy titles, but yeah. If stuff like this sticks with me, even when someone else is playing it, I can imagine what it would be like if I ended up playing through it myself. So, yeah. Moving on next at number 3, we have Lusamine from Pokemon Sun and Moon. Oh boy. Speaking of mothers, speaking of franchises that don't have that many notable mothers, Pokemon is a sort of interesting one. As more or less, we have seen a lot of characters that can be considered mothers. I mean, granted, a good amount of time, the playable character's mother is the most interesting character in themselves. From the mother of the Black 2 and White 2 protagonist, either protagonist being a former Pokemon Center receptionist, to basically either Lucas or Dawn's or Callum and Serena's mother, just having a bigger role in the anime. In fact, the Diamond and Pearl anime, I was considering either Joanna or Grace through the anime alone. And heck, even with Generations 8 and 9, I mean, the mother figures really, the mothers of the protagonists really stand out. I mean, Generation 8's mom, the Gen 8 protagonist's mom, basically stands out by just, well, she looks like your standard British mother. Especially with the fact that she's even wearing Wellington boots as a part of her design. And in Gen 9, this Galarian idea gets expanded with your mom in this game with your mom in Scarlet and Violet being called Mum, which really says a lot. But then again, there are also some standalone mothers which tend to make a bigger splash as well, such as Melanie from Pokemon Sword and Shield, being the mother of Gordy, and even Professor Sada being the mother of Arvin, which, again, kind of proves how I had a hard time figuring out which one would be chosen, since again, I consider Professor Sada. And keep in mind, I've played through Pokemon Scarlet several times, so yeah, I considered Sada for the longest time. And especially since Arvin's Arvin's entire storyline really does kind of hit a kind of a tug at my heartstrings, like a lot. But then again, that really doesn't they really don't hold a candle to Lusamine, who is basically one of the first notable female villains in the Pokemon franchise, being not only the leader of the Ether Foundation, but also the president of the Ether Foundation, as well as the mother of both Lily, who is your companion throughout the Generation 7 games, and Gladion, one of your rivals, and one of the most edgiest characters to date in the game. Yeah, and this is before Marnie and Pierce showed up. But even with that, Lusamine doesn't seem like she would be a mother. However, it is pointed out with that, which really it is pointed out that she basically sees everyone as her children. Pokemon-wise, in fact. Of course, it's implied that when it comes to her children, yeah, they're on rocky terms. Especially since she more or less picks out Lily's clothes for her, so she basically look beautiful by her standards of beauty, which honestly really does say a lot. And eventually she ends up disowning, and as it turns out, she disowned the both of them because they basically ended up absconding with the experiments that she worked on. Gladion basically taking one of the type nulls that they created and running off with it, and Lily basically running off with Cosmog in her bag. I mean, heck, which is seen at the entire opening cutscene at the beginning of the game, both Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And yeah, it really does say a lot. And even further, when you eventually confront Lusamine, you end up in her lab, and you notice that she has several Pokemon cryogenically frozen in blocks of ice. I mean, heck, when I played through Pokemon Sun, and I saw that, honestly, I didn't know what to say. Even I was shocked. However, considering how it's been 10 years since this game came out, seriously, if there's ever a proof to how old I am, it's that. But even with that, I'm able to understand how she feels. I mean, especially with most of this, as it turns out, she ended up losing her husband, Professor Moan, and who ended up disappearing into an ultra wormhole. And naturally, and honestly, losing someone you really care about it can mess a person up. So I can understand how kind of overwhelmed she must feel. So her way of controlling Lily and Gladion and trying to control them is her way of just trying to keep them close to her. However, it ended up with her just pushing them away, which really led her to kind of treat them like they weren't her own family. And heck, she willingly goes into a wormhole to end up being in a world, to live in a world full of Nihilego. One of the Ultra Beasts, and one of the Pokemon who she sees as beautiful, who she sees as her children. Heck, the Mother Beast Lucamine battle is one of the toughest and one of the freakiest. But even after you defeat her, and the battle of which, in order to her, which takes place after, it really says a lot. She's able to see, her head's a lot clearer, and she's able to see Lily as beautiful again in her own way. And this is after Lily finally grows a spine, comes into her own, and stands up to her mother. Yeah, really does say a lot. Of course, in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, this is a little different. And while a lot of people see it as destroying her character, she basically does it to try and protect the entirety of Alola from Necrozma, who is an overarching threat. And yeah, it's at that point, at the Altar of the Sun or Altar of the Moon, depending on which game you have, and that she and Guzma are basically thrown out of the wormhole, and she's able to warn you of Necrozma coming through and taking over Solgaleo or Lunala's mind and body. And speaking of Pokemon, let's go back to her Pokemon team, as all of them kind of fit that as sort of the elegance and beauty that she showcases. From the likes of Milotic, Lilligant, Clefable, which proves the cute and beautiful element within it. The cute and graceful beauty within it. You have Miss Magius, or heck, even Lopunny in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And even Beware, which is an odd one out, but it proves how much of a mama bear she can be. Which, honestly, is a nice little nod to everything that goes on within it. And heck, even at the end of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, when you become champion for the first time, and she comes across, and she ends up getting reunited with Moan. Honestly, while Moan not only shows that he's still alive, but she realizes that she's able to realize that he's not able to remember who he is. Which, honestly, is kind of heart-wrenching, to say the least. And then there's, of course, the anime, where the same thing is seen here, but instead of being a kind of an evil and heartless mother as she's seen in Sun and Moon, but she's often seen as an overworked. She's basically seen as a much more, involved mother, to the point that she's willing to overly dote on her daughter Lily, which does kind of annoy her to an extent. I mean, heck, there's an episode where basically she has her family butler filming Lily and her Alolan Vulpix Snowy having breakfast. Yeah, just all that. No wonder she based. Seriously, no wonder Lily gets annoyed, and no wonder she gave Sophocles the biggest and coldest death glare ever. But even with that, oh boy, the anime even shows it to a fault. Again, I am bringing up the Journeys anime, and while I haven't seen the episode in question as of yet, oh my god, that is the most fitting conclusion to the entire arc involving Lily, Gladion, and Lusamine. Just says a lot. Moving on next at number 2, we have Dynablade from the Kirby franchise. Alright. Now, while I haven't played through Kirby Superstar all that much, in fact, the one time I played through Kirby Superstar, I did not know where to find the main story of the game. But even with that, I could not choose Dynablade. I mean, when it comes down to it, if there's ever a character that fits the entire maternal aspect or mama bear aspect, it's this bird. In all fairness, Kirby tends to have a lot of characters that seem kind of human in the long run. To the point that more often than not, they can be a little, well, sympathetic when you think about it. I mean, heck, in Planet Robobot, we see a father in that in President Haltman. However, considering how Dynablade first showed up in Kirby Superstar, her basically stealing crops from Dreamland, Kirby basically decides to head off to stop her, to basically stop her from causing terror to everyone. And honestly, it really does say a lot as they end up fighting, as they end up in one of the biggest fights. Again, I have not faced off against Dynablade at all. However, oh man, when you actually end up defeating her, you discover that she's basically stealing the crops to feed her babies. And honestly, yeah, she's doing this to take care of her kids. And it's really one of the more heartwarming and caring aspects. And it really says a lot once you realize that in many of the other Kirby games, she does have a bit of a cameo. But the fact that she's introduced with stealing crops to feed her chicks. Again, she is a bird, and baby birds are often called chicks or hatchlings. I'll just call them hatchlings. She's stealing crops to feed her hatchlings is one of the most, honestly, it's something that allows you to feel something. And even in Kirby being right back at ya, this mama bear aspect is seen as basically in an episode of the anime, King Dedede and Escargoon end up tricking Kirby into eating one of Dynablade's eggs. And Dynablade ends up more or less fighting him in order to protect her nest. Which, yeah, granted, it is Kirby that is more or less the aggressor here, but he was more or less tricked into it by Dedede and Escargoon, with Dynablade just protecting her nest. I mean, heck, in Superstar and Superstar Ultra, she basically ends up helping Kirby out by allowing him to by flying him up to the Halberd to face off against Meta Knight. And honestly, yeah, she's still willing to help him even after that little misunderstanding really does say a lot. Honestly, considering how she hasn't been brought back in that much outside of cameos or Air Ride and its sequel, yeah, it really says a lot to her impact. Just, yeah. Finally, at number 1, we have Misty Faye from the Ace Attorney franchise. Honestly, considering how many of these are just mother figures that I don't have that much to know about outside of the video games I have, even though I've played many different video games, it's hard for me to describe certain mothers in a few aspects or a few words. But considering one of the more notable games I've played is the Ace Attorney franchise, oh man, I have been completely... Honestly, I have to say, I really enjoy the Ace Attorney franchise. And honestly, they're kind of interesting when you realize there's always either good mothers or bad mothers. And while I could go on about the bad mothers, case in point Morgan Fay and Garam Sigatar Karain, yeah, when a good mother shows up in the Ace Attorney franchise, yeah, they really stand out. I mean, one such mother being Lamiroar from Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, who is implied to be the mother of Apollo Justice himself. However, every time I might think about this franchise, one thing comes to mind. DL6. And basically, for those who don't know what the DL6 incident is, it basically involves a case where a spirit medium was brought in to help out with a murder investigation, and the case preceding it. And naturally, really does say a lot. Of course, it turns out the spirit medium was Misty Fey herself. Unfortunately, as it turns out, the witness was therefore somewhat compromised, thus throwing the case into contention. And as such, Misty Fey ended up leaving the village and the spirit medium profession out of guilt. Of course, that being said, this also involved a lot of the other players within that case, including Gregory Edgeworth, the father of Miles Edgeworth, and Manfred von Karma. And yeah, it's really one of the more notable ones. However, Misty Fey is one of the few individuals that really took pride in her skills, and the fact she cared about it so much and felt guilt when it was called into contention really says a lot. However, we do realize that this ended up implanting itself in the way her own daughters took to their crafts. As again, and we end up getting someone like Mia Fey, who not only became a skilled defense attorney, but eventually ended up becoming the mentor of Phoenix Wright himself, who, again, from when he began, started off as a simple art student, but eventually decided to change majors to law, thus allowing her to take him on as a protege of sorts. And even after Maya ended up getting killed by Red White, and her sister Mia, and even after Mia ended up getting killed by Red White, and her sister Maya ended up in the picture, yeah, it really, honestly, it goes even further. And while Maya is somewhat of a wild card who, again, gets accused of murder every other Thursday, she's proven herself to more or less add a nice bit of optimism and personality within the games, especially when it comes to her own training as a spirit medium. And honestly, it's one of the best I can think of. And but the biggest one comes courtesy with the final case of Trials and Tribulations. As again, we are introduced to a children's book author named Elise Donham, who, as you didn't know, who many of us didn't even know, is Misty Fey in disguise. So the fact that she ended up returning when Phoenix, Maya, and Pearl Fey end up in a spirit medium retreat, yeah, it's really one of the most heartwarming and heartbreaking reunions, especially when you realize she ends up getting murdered. But even with that, yeah, it kind of proves that, and even when she was disgraced after the events of DL5, she ended up still sticking around for her daughters, even if she couldn't physically be there. And honestly, I think that's one of the best things that made her a solid mother in my eyes. Really says a lot. So with that, those are the top 10 best mothers in video games, in my opinion. Sorry this took really long. Honestly, everything kind of happens, but I'm trying. I'm trying my best. That being said, like, comment, subscribe. And happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there. And to everyone else, call your mothers and let them know thanks for being there for them. I definitely know I'm gonna do that with my mom. You can count on it. See you next time.